Dear friends, imagine waking up one morning and realizing that your life has quietly become a marketplace. You are always reaching for something. More things, more approval, more noise. You consume everything: information, opinions, emotions. Yet deep inside, your soul whispers that it was never made just to consume. It was made to love, to give, to belong. From the beginning of creation, God didn't call us to survive as restless buyers in a crowded world. He called us to live as children of light, and this light cannot be bought, earned, or downloaded. It must be received. True freedom is not the absence of limits. It is the presence of divine purpose. In America, we speak often about freedom, the freedom to choose, to believe, to express. But what about the freedom of the heart? The freedom from fear, comparison, resentment, and the endless chase for recognition. That freedom begins when we stop asking, "What can I get?" and start asking, "Who am I becoming?" Modern life teaches us that happiness can be delivered in 2 days or less. But Jesus teaches us that joy grows slowly, like seeds that must die in the ground before they bloom. And when he said, "You are the salt of the earth, the light of the world," he wasn't giving a compliment. He was giving a mission. Salt preserves what is good, light reveals what is hidden. In a culture obsessed with spotlight, he calls us not to shine for attention, but to shine for truth. In a nation that measures success by wealth and status, the gospel whispers another rhythm. You are already enough when you are loved by God. I once met a man from Chicago who told me, "I used to measure my worth by how many people followed me online. Then one day my phone died, and for the first time, I felt peace." He laughed softly and said, "Maybe the silence was God reminding me who I am when no one is watching." That moment changed his life. It can change ours too. In Scripture, freedom is never about escape, it's about transformation. The Israelites were freed from Egypt not to wander forever, but to worship. You and I are freed from sin, not to do whatever we please, but to love as God loves. The journey from consumer to disciple begins the moment we surrender control. Corrie ten Boom once stood before the man who had tortured her in a Nazi camp. Years later, he asked her for forgiveness. She said she froze. Every part of her wanted to refuse. But then in prayer, she felt God whisper, "Forgive him as I forgave you." When she finally reached out her hand, she said a warmth surged through her arm like an electric current. In that instant, she felt free, not because justice was done, but because love had won. That's what divine freedom looks like. It's not found in comfort, it's found in courage. It's not found in power, it's found in peace. And that peace does not depend on what happens to us, but on what happens within us. In American life, we are taught to take charge, to control outcomes. But the gospel invites us to do something far more radical. To trust. To believe that God is present even when the plan falls apart. To believe that when we lose what we thought we needed, He is giving us what we truly need. A pastor in Texas once said, "God doesn't bless us to raise our standard of living, but to raise our standard of giving." That line lingers, doesn't it? Because in a world where success often means accumulation, the Spirit calls us back to generosity. The heart that gives is the heart that grows. So what would it mean for you today to live free? Maybe it's putting down your phone for a day. Maybe it's forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it. Maybe it's simply sitting still long enough to hear God's voice beneath the noise. Because freedom isn't an event, it's a relationship. The closer you draw to God, the freer you become. And in that freedom, the world begins to change. Not because the system changes, but because you do. Dear friends, if your heart feels heavy tonight, remember this. You were not made to chase after love. You were made to carry it. You are not a number, a product, or a profile. You are the reflection of a Creator who called you good. Let that truth sink in. Let it break your chains. Let it remind you that in Christ you have nothing to prove, nothing to fear, and nothing to lose. You are already home. Dear friends, in a nation built on independence, self-reliance, and personal achievement, It's hard to admit that we can't control everything. From childhood, we're told that if we just work harder, plan smarter, and dream bigger, everything will fall into place. But somewhere along the way, we discover a quiet truth that success can't fix. No matter how tightly we hold on, life still surprises us. We live in a culture that celebrates control. We track our calories, our schedules, our retirement funds, even our steps. We build apps to predict the weather, our mood, and even our relationships. But the one thing we can't predict, the one thing we can't manage, is life itself. And that's where faith begins. Trusting God is not a denial of planning or wisdom. It's the courage to believe even when plans fail. The Bible never promises that life will go according to our design. It promises that God's hand will never let go of ours, even when the road bends beyond our sight. The prophet Isaiah wrote, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you." Isaiah 26:3. Perfect peace doesn't mean perfect circumstances. It means knowing who holds your future when your plans fall apart. I remember speaking with a young woman from California after the wildfires destroyed her home. She stood there, surrounded by ash and silence, and said, "All I had left was a cross pendant I found in the rubble. I guess that's all God wanted me to keep." That's what letting go looks like. Not giving up, but giving in to the one who knows how to rebuild better than we ever could. In American life, control is often confused with strength. We think strong people never waver, never cry, never fail. But biblical strength isn't about holding it all together. It's about knowing who to lean on when it all falls apart. Pastor Rick Warren once said, "Faith is like a muscle. When it gets stretched, it grows." Sometimes God allows uncertainty not to break us, but to build us. In the chaos, our faith muscles are being trained to trust, to surrender, to breathe. There's an old American saying, "Let go and let God." It's simple, almost cliché, yet it carries a truth as deep as the ocean. Because letting go is never easy. We let go of control only when we realize control was never really ours to begin with. One man in Ohio shared how he lost his job during the pandemic. For months, he fought anxiety and anger, watching his savings shrink and his dreams disappear. Then one night, while praying, he said out loud, "God, if I lose everything but still have you, I have enough." The next morning, peace flooded his heart like never before. Nothing in his situation had changed, but he had changed. That's the mysterious beauty of surrender. It doesn't always change our world, but it changes how we walk through it. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus tells his followers not to worry about tomorrow. Not because tomorrow doesn't matter, but because worry steals today. Americans are used to planning 5-year goals, securing insurance, mapping out careers, but few of us have learned to rest. Surrender is not laziness, it's trust. It's standing in the storm with open hands instead of clenched fists. Joyce Meyer once wrote, "You can be pitiful or powerful, but you can't be both." When we cling to fear, we become prisoners of our own plans. But when we let go, we make space for miracles. Think of Abraham, who left his home without knowing where he was going. Or Peter, who stepped out of the boat into the waves. Or Mary, who said yes to an impossible calling. None of them knew what would come next, but all of them trusted the one who called them. Maybe the American heart finds this especially hard because our culture loves guarantees. We want contracts, warranties, clear directions. But God offers something different. Not a guarantee of outcomes, but a guarantee of presence. A Navy chaplain once told me, "Out on the ocean, you can't see the shore. But if you know who's steering the ship, you can sleep in the storm." Trust doesn't eliminate fear, it anchors you through it. Every time you let go of control, of resentment, of worry, you step closer to freedom. The hands that cling cannot receive, but the hands that open can be filled. Dear friends, maybe you've been fighting too hard to hold something together, a relationship, a job, a dream. Maybe tonight, the most courageous thing you can do is stop. Take a deep breath. Whisper, God, I don't understand, but I trust you. And in that moment, something sacred happens. Peace begins to move in. The chaos doesn't vanish, but the fear loses its voice. Because trust isn't built on what we see, it's built on who He is. So as we move forward, remember this: surrender is not weakness, it's worship. It's the art of living hands open to heaven, knowing that everything God allows, He can redeem. And in a world obsessed with control, that kind of peace will shine brighter than any success story ever could. Dear friends, there are wounds in life that no one sees. They don't bleed, but they ache, quietly, constantly. Sometimes they come from words spoken in anger, sometimes from love withheld, and sometimes they come from ourselves, from choices we can't seem to forgive. We live in a world that tells us to move on, to stay strong, to just get over it. But forgiveness isn't a switch we flip. It's a journey, a long, often painful one. And in America, where strength is often mistaken for silence, many people walk around carrying invisible scars because they were taught that vulnerability means weakness. But the truth is, forgiveness is the deepest kind of courage. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't hurt. It doesn't mean trusting again right away. It means choosing freedom over bitterness, healing over hate. It means saying, this pain will not define who I am. In hospitals across the country, chaplains have seen it again and again. People on their deathbeds holding on to one final burden: unforgiveness. One nurse from Boston once said, you can tell who's at peace and who's not. The ones who forgive, they go softly. That's the quiet miracle of mercy. In American culture, justice and fairness are deeply valued. We're raised to believe that every wrong should be made right. But forgiveness is not the opposite of justice. It's the beginning of healing. When we forgive, we hand justice over to God and free ourselves from carrying the weight of revenge. I once met a man at a church retreat in Texas. He had not spoken to his brother in over 15 years. Their argument started over money but grew into pride, distance, and years of silence. During one night of prayer, he whispered, God, I don't even remember why I'm angry anymore. That night, he picked up the phone, and the first word he said was, I miss you. The next morning, he said to me, it wasn't my brother I freed. It was myself. That's what forgiveness does. It doesn't erase history, but it rewrites the future. In every American town, there's someone holding on to bitterness. A parent estranged from a child, a friend betrayed, a community divided. And yet, when forgiveness happens, something sacred unfolds. Marriages find hope, families heal, churches come alive again. Because where forgiveness flows, life begins to breathe. We often think forgiveness is for the other person, but psychologists, pastors, and even doctors have confirmed it's also for us. The act of forgiving releases the body from stress, lowers blood pressure, and strengthens the immune system. But even more than that, it cleanses the soul. When you hold a grudge, it's like drinking poison and hoping someone else will die. But when you forgive, the poison loses its power. There's a woman from Georgia who shared her story in a community church. Her son had been killed by a drunk driver. The pain was unbearable, the anger consuming. For years, she replayed that night in her mind. Then one Sunday, she heard a sermon on grace. The preacher said, forgiveness is not saying it's okay, it's saying I won't let this pain own me anymore. That week, she visited the man in prison. Through tears, she said, I forgive you. Years later, she started a foundation helping families of DUI victims find hope again. That's what divine forgiveness does. It transforms pain into purpose. In many American homes, people bow their heads at dinner and say, God, bless this food, bless this family. But imagine what would happen if we also prayed, God, help me forgive. Forgiveness is not a feeling, it's a decision. You may not feel ready, but faith isn't about feelings, it's about obedience. When we forgive, we imitate the heart of Christ, the one who looked at his enemies and said, Father, forgive them. That's not weakness, that's power, the kind of power that changes the world one heart at a time. Dear friends, maybe there's someone in your life whose name still stirs pain in your chest. Maybe it's a friend, a parent, or even yourself. Tonight, let that name rest in God's hands. Say it softly with love, and then let it go. Because forgiveness is not about the past, it's about your future. It's about walking lighter, breathing easier, living freer. It's about finding peace, not in what others do, but in who you choose to become. And when you finally forgive, you'll feel it. The weight lift, the tears soften, the heart open. You'll realize you were never meant to carry this alone. The world doesn't need more punishment. It needs more healing. And that healing begins when we whisper the most difficult and the most holy words, I forgive you. Dear friends, there's something extraordinary about light. It doesn't argue with darkness, it simply shines, and the darkness cannot stay. When Jesus said, "You are the light of the world," he wasn't describing a future version of you. He was revealing who you already are. But sometimes life dims that light. Maybe it's disappointment, loss, or fear. Maybe it's the exhaustion of trying to be good enough in a culture that celebrates image over integrity. We start to hide our light, thinking the world doesn't need it, or worse, that it's too small to matter. Yet light doesn't have to be large, it just has to be real. One candle can change a whole room. In America today, we live surrounded by noise and division. Social media feeds us outrage. News channels feed us fear. People talk more than they listen, react more than they reflect. But when the world gets loud, light whispers through love. The kind of love that listens, that forgives, that helps without cameras watching. A teacher from North Carolina once shared that she started a simple practice in her classroom. Every Friday, she asked her students to write one kind note about someone else. She said, "I wanted them to learn that words can either wound or heal." Years later, former students wrote to her saying those moments changed their lives. She didn't preach sermons, she lived one. That's what it means to be light. Being light doesn't mean being perfect. It means showing up. It means kindness when no one thanks you, integrity when no one notices, mercy when it's undeserved. It means being the steady flame in a flickering world. And Jesus didn't stop there. He said, "You are the salt of the earth." Salt preserves. It gives flavor. It makes things come alive. In a world that's lost its taste for truth and compassion, we're called to bring flavor back, to make faith tangible, not theoretical. Think of a family dinner in a small Midwestern town. The smell of bread baking, laughter at the table, a prayer said before the meal. There's warmth, presence, connection. That's what salt does. It binds people together. When we live out our faith in daily moments like these, we season the world with hope. But here's the truth. Light costs something. Salt costs something. To shine means to burn. To flavor means to dissolve. Being salt and light means living with open hearts in a world that sometimes mocks faith, misunderstands compassion, or labels humility as weakness. Yet the greatest strength is often the quietest one. I once met a firefighter in New York who told me, "I see more miracles in smoke and ashes than most people do in comfort." He said, "When I run into a burning building, I don't think about fame or fear. I think about saving one more person." That's salt and light in motion. That's faith with boots on the ground. In American culture, we talk a lot about success stories, about being number one, about standing out. But God doesn't call us to stand above. He calls us to stand within, to illuminate, not dominate. When you walk into a room filled with anxiety, bring peace. When others curse the darkness, light a candle. That's how revival starts, not through noise, but through presence. There's a quiet revolution happening across America. Small acts of love in coffee shops, schools, hospitals, and homes. A nurse praying for her patient. A teenager volunteering at a shelter. A father reconciling with his child. They are the unseen saints who prove that light still wins. Maybe the most powerful sermon you'll ever preach won't be with words, but with kindness. People might forget what you say, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. Dear friends, your life is not too ordinary to matter. Your small light is not too weak to shine. Every smile, every act of patience, every prayer whispered in secret, it all counts. The world doesn't need louder voices, it needs brighter lives. So don't hide your light out of fear. Don't lose your salt to apathy. Let your faith be visible in your daily choices, your compassion, your honesty. And when people ask why you love the way you do, you'll know the answer. Because you were first loved by a God who never stops shining. And even when life feels dark, when hope flickers and strength fades, remember this: light was never meant to come from us alone. It flows through us from the one who is light itself. Keep shining even when the night is long. Keep loving even when it's costly. Because when the world sees that kind of light, it begins to believe again. Dear friends, vision is one of God's greatest gifts, but there is a kind of sight that goes beyond what the eyes can see. It's the vision of the heart. The world around us teaches that seeing is believing, but in the kingdom of God, believing is seeing. Faith is not blindness, it's deeper sight. In America, where everything is measured, success, beauty, influence, faith often feels like stepping into fog. We want clarity, we want proof. We want to know the ending before we begin. But faith begins where certainty ends. It's the quiet courage to walk when you can't yet see the road. When we rely only on physical sight, we limit ourselves to the visible. But when we open the eyes of the heart, we begin to see the invisible. Grace in pain, purpose in struggle, light in darkness. The eyes of faith reveal what fear tries to hide. That God is working, even when life looks broken. A pastor from Chicago once said, "Faith doesn't make things easy, it makes them possible." I remember meeting a woman from Oklahoma who had lost her husband unexpectedly. For months, she lived in silence, unable to pray. One morning, while sitting on her porch watching the sunrise, she said, "I can't see the reason, but I can see the love that's holding me through it." That's what faith that sees looks like. It finds light even in the shadows. Our culture often rewards logic, control, and visibility, but faith invites us to trust the unseen. It calls us to look beyond the numbers, beyond the diagnoses, beyond the headlines. It teaches us to see the fingerprints of God on the details we overlook. When Jesus healed the blind man, he didn't just restore physical vision. He opened a window into the man's soul. And that same miracle happens today. Not always with sight restored, but with hearts awakened. A veteran from Virginia once shared his story at a church gathering. After years of combat, he came home with deep wounds, some visible, most invisible. He said, "I used to ask, where was God in all of it? But now I see, he was there, crying with me, carrying me when I couldn't walk." Faith opened his eyes to something his mind couldn't explain, but his heart could finally feel. Seeing through faith doesn't mean ignoring reality. It means viewing reality through God's promise. When your world looks dark, faith reminds you that the story isn't over. It's the difference between saying, "I'm finished," and "God's not finished yet." In American life, we are trained to fix problems quickly, to find solutions, to take action. But there are moments when faith asks us not to fix, but to wait. Waiting is one of the hardest acts of trust. Yet in waiting, we learn to see differently. We begin to notice the small mercies, the friend who checks in, the strength to get through another day, the peace that makes no sense. Helen Keller, who lived without sight or hearing, once said, "The only thing worse than being blind is having sight, but no vision." Her life became a testimony that true vision comes from within. She saw more clearly than many who had perfect eyesight because she saw with faith. And maybe that's what God wants for us, to stop living by what we see and start living by what we believe. To look at a broken relationship and still see reconciliation. To look at a hurting world and still see hope. To look at ourselves with all our flaws and still see a beloved child of God. There's a story of a small church in rural Montana that burned down one winter night. Everything was destroyed, except the wooden cross that stood behind the altar. The next Sunday, the congregation gathered outside in the snow, around that cross, singing softly. One man said later, "We couldn't see the building anymore, but we could still see the reason we came." Faith that sees is not about avoiding pain, it's about finding purpose in it. It's about trusting that the same God who brings light to the sky every morning will bring light to your soul again. Dear friends, open the eyes of your heart. Ask God to show you what your eyes cannot. When life feels uncertain, whisper, "Lord, help me see you here." And slowly, the fog begins to lift. Not always because the circumstances change, but because your heart does. When you begin to see with faith, you'll recognize miracles in the mundane, the laughter of a child, the kindness of a stranger, the sunrise after a long night. You'll find beauty not in perfection, but in perseverance. And you'll know that even when life doesn't look the way you hoped, God's presence has never left you. Faith is not closing your eyes to reality, it's opening them to eternity. It's walking through storms with your gaze fixed not on the waves, but on the one who calms them. So wherever you are tonight, whether you see clearly or through tears, know this: God sees you. He sees your pain, your hope, your fight to keep believing. And He whispers gently, "Keep your eyes on me," because when you do, everything else begins to make sense in His light. Hey, dear friends, there are moments in life when pain seems to swallow everything else. The diagnosis you didn't expect, the betrayal you never saw coming, the silence after someone you loved is gone. In those moments, you might wonder, where is God in all this? In America, we are taught to fight pain, to fix it, to escape it. We fill our days with distractions, work, screens, noise, anything to silence the ache. But what if pain is not something to run from, but something through which grace can be found? Pain, in its strange way, becomes a classroom. It strips away illusions, pride, and pretense until only what's real remains. It's in suffering that we often see God most clearly, not because He suddenly appears, but because our defenses finally fall. I remember a man from Tennessee who lost everything in a flood: his house, his job, even his sense of safety. When volunteers came to help clean up, he said quietly, "I thought I lost my faith too. But then I saw strangers rebuilding my home, people praying for me, and I realized God never left. He just came wearing work boots." That's how grace often shows up in America, quietly, through the hands of others. A nurse staying past her shift in a hospital, a neighbor showing up with food after a funeral, a church paying the rent for a single mother without telling her name. Grace doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through ordinary people who love like Christ. Struggle has a way of uncovering what comfort conceals. When everything is easy, we rely on ourselves. But when life breaks, we learn to rely on God. Pain pushes us toward humility, and humility opens the door to healing. There's a woman in Colorado who shared her story on a Sunday morning. After years battling addiction, she said, "I used to see my struggle as punishment. Now I see it as the place where God met me." Her pain became the soil where new life grew, and her testimony became hope for others still fighting in the dark. Maybe that's the hidden grace of struggle. It teaches us compassion. When you've walked through pain, you recognize it in others. You become gentler, slower to judge, quicker to listen. In a culture that celebrates strength and success, compassion is countercultural. It's divine. C.S. Lewis once wrote that pain is God's megaphone to rouse a deaf world. It's not that God delights in our suffering, but that He speaks most clearly when we're quiet enough to hear. When we stop asking, "Why me?" and start asking, "What now, Lord?" the transformation begins. A pastor in Florida once told the story of a young soldier who returned home from war missing a leg. When someone asked if he ever got angry at God, the soldier smiled and said, "No, because the leg I lost taught me how to stand on faith." That's the kind of strength pain can build, a faith that stands even when life knocks you down. In every American town, there are crosses that don't hang on walls, but live in hearts. They're carried by parents with sick children, by veterans haunted by memories, by people quietly battling depression while showing up to work every day. These are sacred stories, holy ground disguised as human struggle. When you look at a sunrise after a storm, you see something profound, beauty born from devastation. The colors are more vivid, the air more still. That's what grace does. It takes the broken pieces and makes something radiant out of them. Dear friends, maybe you're walking through a season right now that feels unbearable. Maybe you've prayed and heaven feels silent. But remember, silence does not mean absence. When you can't trace God's hand, trust His heart. He is still working, still weaving purpose through the pain. A woman in Boston once shared how, after her husband's death, she started writing one thing she was grateful for every day. At first, it was just survival. I made it through today. But slowly, gratitude became her healing. She said, gratitude didn't erase my pain, it gave it meaning. That's the hidden grace of struggle. It gives us eyes to see blessings we once ignored. It reminds us that faith is not about avoiding fire, but finding God in it. And when we look back, we often realize the hardest seasons were the ones that shaped us most. They softened our hearts, deepened our faith, and taught us what love really costs. So if you're hurting today, don't rush to escape it. Sit with it. Breathe through it. Ask God, what are you showing me here? Because sometimes the answer won't come as explanation, but as presence. The cross, after all, was the greatest pain turned into the greatest grace. Out of the darkest day came resurrection. And that same power lives in you. Hold on. Grace is not absent, it's hidden, waiting to be revealed through your perseverance. One day you'll look back and say, that season didn't destroy me. It refined me. It taught me how to see God even when I couldn't feel Him. And when you do, your story will become someone else's light. Dear friends, sometimes we imagine that God only shows up in holy places, inside cathedrals, during worship, or at moments of crisis. But the truth is, He walks among us every single day. He is in the commute traffic, the grocery store line, the quiet morning coffee before the world wakes up. The God of the universe is not distant, He is deeply near. Many Americans grow up hearing about God, but few learn how to recognize Him in the ordinary. We've been trained to look for the spectacular, the miracles, the mountaintop moments. Yet more often than not, God's voice sounds like a whisper, and His miracles look like grace, disguised as routine. A truck driver from Iowa once said in an interview, I used to think I had to be in church to feel close to God, but I found Him in the sunrise on the road, when the world was quiet and I felt a peace I couldn't explain. That's what happens when the soul learns to notice. The sacred suddenly appears everywhere. Our modern culture moves fast. We multitask, overbook, and drown in noise. But God doesn't compete with noise. He waits for stillness. In stillness, you start to see His fingerprints on your children's laughter, in a stranger's kindness, in the strength you didn't know you had to get through another day. In America, we often equate success with movement. We think we're close to God when life is productive, when the results show. But God's presence is not measured by outcomes. It's measured by peace. When your heart rests even in uncertainty, that's when you know He's near. There's a story about a nurse from Ohio who worked through the height of the pandemic. She said, there were nights I couldn't pray. I just sat beside patients, holding their hands when their families couldn't be there. I didn't realize it then, but I was holding the hand of Christ. God was walking those hospital halls through her compassion. Sometimes we don't have to see Him to know He's there. We just have to love, and He appears through that love. The American lifestyle praises independence, but faith teaches interdependence, our need for God and one another. We weren't meant to walk alone. The Bible never shows God sending people into the wilderness without walking beside them. He didn't remove the fire for the Israelites. He became the pillar of fire that guided them. He didn't keep Daniel from the lion's den, he shut the lions' mouths inside it. And he doesn't always remove our trials, but he joins us in them. A soldier returning from Afghanistan once shared, "There were nights when I thought I was done for. Then, in the middle of chaos, I felt this calm. Not from me, but around me. That's how I knew God was there." He said it wasn't a voice or vision, just a quiet knowing, and that knowing carried him home. When you walk with God, the ordinary becomes holy ground. Washing dishes becomes worship. Talking with a friend becomes prayer. Every act of patience, every word of encouragement, every sacrifice unnoticed by the world, He sees it all. He walks with you in it. A pastor from Georgia once told his congregation, "If you can't find God where you are, you won't find Him anywhere else." It's easy to seek Him in the grand gestures, revivals, miracles, answered prayers. But His favorite meeting place has always been the human heart. Dear friends, maybe you feel distant from God right now. Maybe your prayers feel unanswered, your faith quiet. But distance is an illusion. You can no more escape God's presence than you can escape your own breath. He is beside you in the morning rush, in the heartbreak, in the laughter, in the long drive home when tears come uninvited. Sometimes we find Him most clearly not when life is easy, but when it's heavy. When we're too weak to pretend we have it all together. Because it's there, in our weakness, that His strength becomes visible. There's a story about an elderly man in Texas who visited his wife's grave every evening for 10 years. One day someone asked him why he came so often. He smiled and said, "Because love doesn't end, and I still talk to God about her." In his grief, he had learned the secret of companionship with God, the kind that never stops, even when words do. Faith isn't about chasing after God. It's about slowing down enough to notice that He's already beside you. He's in the people you pass every day, in the opportunities to give, in the moments that seem too small to matter but build eternity one heartbeat at a time. So as you walk through your daily life, your work, your family, your quiet moments, remember this: the God who created galaxies also walks the sidewalks with you. He is closer than your next breath, and He delights not just in your prayers, but in your presence. Dear friends, don't wait for perfect moments to find Him. Look for Him in the imperfect ones, the ones where you feel lost, tired, or overlooked. That's where grace shows up. That's where He whispers, "I'm here." And when you start to see Him in the ordinary, you'll realize that every day, every breath, every moment is sacred. Not because of what you do, but because of who walks with you. He's not just the God of the mountaintop. He's the God of the Monday morning, the grocery line, the broken heart, the quiet prayer before sleep. He's the God who walks with you. Always. Dear friends, if you listen closely, the world is crying out, not for more opinions, not for more noise, but for compassion. We live in a time when people are connected through screens but disconnected in spirit. We scroll past pain, double-tap suffering, and call it awareness. But compassion is not passive. It is love in motion. To be compassionate is to see with the heart before the eyes. It's to walk into someone's darkness and carry a bit of light, not with judgment, but with gentleness. And yet, in modern America, compassion can feel risky. We're taught to protect ourselves, to stay busy, to keep a safe distance from others' messiness. But Jesus never kept His distance. He touched lepers, dined with outcasts, wept with the broken. Compassion was His native language, the language of heaven. There's a story from Kansas about a police officer who responded to a call involving a homeless man outside a grocery store. Instead of writing him a ticket for trespassing, the officer sat with him, bought him a sandwich, and listened. Later, when asked why he didn't arrest him, he said, "Because sometimes people don't need law, they need love." That's the kind of miracle compassion creates. It doesn't make headlines, but it changes hearts. In a culture driven by achievement, compassion slows us down to remember what matters most: people. It reminds us that every human being carries a story, and behind every story is a soul longing to be seen. When the pandemic hit, a nurse in New York stayed by the bedside of patients who couldn't see their families. She said, "Sometimes all I could do was hold their hand, and that was enough." That simple act, just presence, just love, became sacred. Compassion transforms ordinary moments into holy ones. American society often celebrates the strong, the independent, the self-made. But heaven celebrates the humble, the ones who stop on the side of the road, who listen without interrupting, who give when no one's watching. Compassion is not weakness, it's divine strength wearing human skin. There's a pastor in Chicago who once said, "Every act of kindness is a sermon the world can understand." In a time when people debate theology and divide over doctrines, compassion remains the one message that needs no translation. When you feed the hungry, forgive the offender, or comfort the lonely, you are preaching with your hands. A teacher in Texas once noticed a boy who came to school without lunch every day. Quietly, she began packing an extra sandwich. Years later, that same boy, now grown, wrote to her, "You never knew it, but your lunches taught me that God saw me." That's the miracle of compassion. It teaches love without words. Dear friends, compassion is not about fixing everything. It's about showing up anyway. Sometimes the most Christ-like thing you can do is to simply be there. Sit with the grieving. Call the forgotten. Forgive the undeserving. In a society that prizes comfort, compassion chooses discomfort for the sake of another. The United States is known for its innovation, its ambition, its freedom. But perhaps the greatest mark of greatness is not what we build, but how we love. What if the next great American revival doesn't start in a stadium, but around a dinner table, with a family choosing to forgive or a neighbor choosing to care? I once met a retired soldier in Virginia who volunteers at a food pantry every week. When asked why he does it, he said, "I've seen enough war to know what hate does. I want to spend the rest of my life undoing it." That's compassion. Redemption in motion. In faith, compassion isn't just emotion, it's obedience. When you love someone who can't return the favor, you reflect the heart of God. When you choose mercy over pride, you turn pain into prayer. Compassion bridges what politics, power, and pride cannot. It's heaven touching earth through the human heart. And maybe in the end, compassion is the only sermon people will remember. You can't argue with kindness. You can't debate genuine care. You can only feel it. And when you feel it, you begin to believe again. Dear friends, look around your world. Someone near you needs compassion right now. It might be a coworker hiding behind a smile, a neighbor going through divorce, a friend pretending to be fine. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Step in, speak gently, act boldly, love freely, because compassion is contagious. It multiplies. It starts with one act, a word, a gesture, a prayer, and before you know it, the world begins to heal. The miracle of compassion is that it doesn't just change others, it transforms us. It softens our hearts, aligns our priorities, and pulls us closer to the heart of God. When love becomes the language of our lives, heaven feels a little closer. So tonight, wherever you are, may your heart be open, your hands be ready, and your faith be alive enough to love like Christ loved, not with conditions, but with courage. Because in the end, the most powerful miracle is not walking on water, it's walking in love. Dear friends, gratitude is not about having everything you want. It's about recognizing that everything you have is already a gift. In a world that constantly tells us to reach for more, to buy more, to achieve more, to become more, it takes real courage to stop, look around, and whisper, "Thank you." In America, we celebrate Thanksgiving once a year, a table filled with family, food, and laughter. But gratitude was never meant to be a single holiday. It's meant to be a way of life. True Thanksgiving doesn't happen because everything is perfect. It happens because even in the imperfection, we still see grace. There's an old farmer in Iowa who once said, "When I stopped praying for rain and started thanking God for the soil, the rain didn't matter as much. That's the power of perspective. Gratitude doesn't change the weather, but it changes the heart that walks through the storm. We live in a nation blessed with abundance, yet so many hearts remain empty. Our culture measures life by what we gain, not by what we give. We chase what's next and forget what's now. But when you learn to live with a grateful heart, every moment becomes sacred, even the small ones. I remember hearing a story about a woman from Pennsylvania who was going through cancer treatment. When asked how she kept smiling through the pain, she said, "I thank God for the nurses, for my husband's voice, for another sunrise. Gratitude gives me back what pain tries to steal." Gratitude doesn't erase hardship, it redeems it. In today's fast-paced world, it's easy to treat blessings like background noise, always there, barely noticed. The breath in your lungs, the people who love you, the meals you didn't have to worry about. These are miracles disguised as routine. Gratitude opens your eyes to see them. American culture often celebrates self-made success, but gratitude reminds us that we are not self-sustained. Every opportunity, every heartbeat, every ounce of strength comes from somewhere beyond ourselves. Gratitude humbles us, grounds us, and connects us to the giver more than the gifts. There's a veteran from Texas who once said, "When I came home from war, I couldn't sleep for months. Then one night I started listing things I was thankful for. The stars, the bed, the roof, the sound of my kids sleeping. I found peace in counting what I still had, instead of mourning what I lost." Gratitude became his therapy. Dear friends, gratitude is a daily practice, not a spontaneous emotion. It's a choice, a discipline of the heart. And it often begins where comfort ends. When life breaks, gratitude holds you together. When disappointment comes, gratitude reminds you there's still more to the story. The Bible tells us that everything good comes from above, but sometimes the good looks like lessons wrapped in loss, strength born from struggle, or joy discovered in tears. Gratitude doesn't deny the pain, it finds God in it. A mother from California once shared how her son, who had autism, taught her what real gratitude looks like. She said, "Every time he looks at me and says, 'I love you, Mom,' it's not just words, it's a miracle. It's a prayer answered one syllable at a time." Gratitude transforms what the world calls ordinary into something divine. When you live with gratitude, anxiety begins to lose its voice. Because gratitude focuses on what is, while anxiety fears what might be. Gratitude turns the mirror away from what's missing and reflects what's present. It says, "I may not have all I want, but I have enough for today, and today is enough." In the United States, we have a phrase, "Count your blessings." It's simple, but it carries eternal truth. Gratitude multiplies joy. The more you thank God for what you have, the more aware you become of His hand in everything. And the more aware you become, the more joy grows. Maybe right now you're in a season that feels dry, a winter of the soul. Gratitude doesn't ask you to pretend the pain isn't real. It invites you to notice the small warmths that still exist. The smile of a friend, the kindness of a stranger, the quiet faith that keeps you standing. These are reminders that grace is still here. A pastor from North Carolina once said, "Gratitude is the song faith sings in the dark." You don't need to see the sunrise to start praising. You just need to trust that the dawn is coming. Dear friends, if you take one thing from this message, let it be this. Gratitude is not about waiting for life to get better. It's about seeing that God has been good all along. When you begin to thank Him for the small things, you'll start to see big miracles. When you stop asking, "Why me?" and start saying, "Thank you anyway," peace enters where confusion once lived. So tonight, wherever you are, take a moment. Close your eyes and breathe. Think of one thing, just one, that you can thank God for. Maybe it's your health, your family, or simply the breath you're taking right now. That moment of gratitude is the doorway to joy. Gratitude doesn't require a perfect life, just an open heart. And when your heart opens, grace rushes in. Because gratitude is not the end of worship, it's the beginning. It's the language of heaven spoken through the voice of a thankful soul. Dear friends, every day, God places opportunities before us. Not to prove how much we know, but to show how deeply we love. To become the hands of God means allowing His compassion to move through us, turning faith into action, and love into something the world can touch. In America, we often admire the people who make a difference, the philanthropists, the innovators, the heroes in uniforms. But the truth is, God's greatest work often happens quietly, through ordinary hands doing extraordinary things. The teacher who stays after class to help a struggling student, the neighbor who mows the lawn for an elderly widow, the stranger who pays for someone's groceries without expecting thanks. These are not random acts of kindness. They are divine fingerprints on the human heart. A story from a small town in Kentucky tells of a man who repaired shoes for 50 years. Every morning he prayed, "Lord, let the work of my hands bring someone comfort today." He never preached a sermon or stood on a stage, yet every person who wore his shoes carried a little bit of his prayer. That's what it means to be the hands of God, to do small things with great love. We live in a culture that celebrates visibility. But in the kingdom of God, it's not the seen that matters, it's the sincere. Heaven measures greatness not by applause, but by the quiet sacrifices that no one notices but God. There's a nurse in Florida who volunteers at a hospice center. She said, "I used to think my job was to help people die with dignity. Now I see it's about helping them feel loved until their last breath." That's the gospel in motion. To touch another's pain with tenderness is to hold the heart of Christ in your hands. Dear friends, every blessing you've received was never meant to end with you. God doesn't pour His grace into us like a container. He pours it through us like a channel. When we give, encourage, forgive, or serve, we become the living extension of His mercy. In the gospel, Jesus never asked the disciples to admire His miracles. He asked them to continue them. Feed them, He said to His followers when the crowds were hungry. Heal them, He said when they were broken. The same call echoes today. You don't need a pulpit to preach. You just need love, strong enough to reach. There's a firefighter in California who risked his life to rescue a child from a burning home. When asked later how he found the courage, he said, "I just thought, if that were my son, I'd want someone to go in." Compassion always begins with imagination, the willingness to see others as part of ourselves. To be the hands of God is not to live without fear. It's to act despite it. Every good deed is a declaration that love is stronger than fear, that light still breaks through darkness. And when we choose to serve, we don't just change others, we are changed ourselves. A pastor in Tennessee told the story of a man who volunteered to rebuild homes after a hurricane. After weeks of grueling labor, someone asked him what kept him going. He said, "When I hammer these nails, I feel like I'm repairing more than wood. I'm repairing hope." That's the holy mystery of service. We think we're building houses, but God is building hearts. American life often praises independence, but faith calls us to interdependence, to lift each other up, to carry each other's burdens. When we live this way, community becomes more than a word. It becomes the heartbeat of heaven on earth. Dear friends, maybe you think your contribution is too small to matter. But remember, Jesus multiplied a boy's lunch to feed thousands. God doesn't ask for perfection, He asks for participation. Your small yes can become someone else's miracle. A young mother in Ohio began cooking meals for single parents in her neighborhood. She said, "I just wanted them to know they weren't forgotten." One act of kindness sparked a movement, and now hundreds of families share meals together every week. When love multiplies, it no longer looks ordinary, it looks divine. Every time you choose to forgive, you extend the hand of God. Every time you choose compassion over criticism, you touch heaven's heart. Every time you speak hope into someone's despair, you become the voice of Christ in a weary world. Sometimes being the hands of God means simply holding on, holding a friend's hand through grief, holding your tongue when anger rises, holding faith when everything seems lost. Even in stillness, you can serve. Dear friends, the world doesn't need more believers who talk about love. It needs more believers who live it. Love that rolls up its sleeves, that bends low to wash feet, that lifts up the broken without asking if they deserve it. There's an old saying in the American South, the only sermon some people will ever hear is the one you live. You don't have to be a preacher to share God's message. You just have to show up with a willing heart. When you let God use your hands, you begin to see His miracles unfold in front of you. You become part of His story, an instrument of grace, a reflection of mercy, a light that refuses to fade. Dear friends, may we never forget that every breath is a gift and every gift is a calling. The question is not, will God use me? But am I willing to be used? Because the world is aching for hands like His, hands that heal, help, and hold. So wherever you are tonight, in your home, at your workplace, or on a quiet walk, ask yourself, who can I bless today? Then listen. The answer will come softly, like a whisper in the soul. And when you act, heaven smiles. Because to become the hands of God is not to do everything, it is to do something with love right where you are. And that, dear friends, is where the kingdom begins. Dear friends, there are moments in life when darkness feels overwhelming, when prayers echo back in silence, when loss cuts deep, when the road ahead disappears into fog. Every soul, at some point, stands in that place where faith trembles and hope flickers like a dying candle. Yet it's there, in the heart of the night, that God often whispers the loudest. Darkness is not the absence of God. It's the canvas where His light becomes visible. Like stars that only appear when the sun sets, faith often shines brightest when everything else fades. In America, we live in a culture that hides its pain well. We smile through grief, post filtered pictures and say, "I'm fine," even when we're breaking inside. But God is not fooled by masks. He meets us not in the perfection we project, but in the honesty of our brokenness. A firefighter from New York once said after 9/11, "When the towers fell, I thought the world had ended. But in the ashes, I saw people running toward the danger to save others." That's when I realized light doesn't vanish in darkness, it runs into it. That is what faith looks like. Not denial of fear, but courage that refuses to let fear win. There's a story of a woman in California who lost her son in a car accident. For months she couldn't pray. She said, "I used to think faith was never doubting. Now I know faith is trusting even when you doubt." Her words remind us that faith is not about never falling. It's about rising again with God's help. Sometimes God doesn't remove the darkness. He teaches us how to walk through it. He doesn't always answer why, but He always answers who. Who will hold you? Who will guide you? Who will never leave you? The answer is always the same: He will. Dear friends, faith is not built in comfort. It is forged in the fire, refined in the waiting, and strengthened in the struggle. When everything you depended on is stripped away, faith steps forward and says, "Even here, God is good." A pastor in Louisiana told of a church destroyed by a hurricane. Weeks later, the congregation gathered in the ruins under open sky. They sang hymns among broken pews and shattered glass. He said, "That day I realized the church is not a building, it's faith standing when the world falls apart." Every culture has its storms, financial crises, wars, pandemics, divisions. But the American heart has always been resilient. When faith anchors us, we can rebuild, forgive, and begin again. Because faith doesn't make life easy, it makes it possible. There's a veteran from Ohio who returned from war carrying invisible scars. Nightmares haunted him, faith felt far. Then one evening, a stranger at a diner paid for his meal and left a note. "You are not forgotten." That moment became his turning point. He said, "I felt seen again, not just by that person, but by God." Sometimes light enters through the smallest cracks of kindness. When hope feels lost, remember this: God's silence is not his absence. Even when he seems quiet, he is still working, preparing, healing, aligning what you cannot yet see. Dear friends, we often ask God to change our circumstances, but he's more interested in changing us through them. The valley teaches what the mountaintop never can, that his grace is enough, even when everything else runs out. In rural Montana, a farmer once prayed during a drought, "Lord, I don't ask for rain anymore. I ask for faith that grows deeper than the soil." That's what real trust sounds like, a surrender that still hopes, even when the ground is dry. We must learn to let go of the idea that faith means always feeling strong. Faith is not a feeling, it's a decision. You can cry and still believe. You can be afraid and still trust. You can walk in darkness and still follow the light. When life hurts, remember Jesus himself walked through darkness. He faced betrayal, loneliness, and the cross. Yet even in his agony, he whispered, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." He didn't deny the pain, he trusted through it. In a hospital in Chicago, a young doctor who had just lost her first patient said through tears, "I couldn't save her, but I prayed over her, and I felt God saying, 'I'm still here.'" Sometimes that's the miracle. Not that everything gets fixed, but that his presence remains. Dear friends, when you can't see the way, take the next small step. When you can't pray, whisper his name. When you can't feel God, trust that he still feels you. His love doesn't depend on your strength. It depends on his promise. A Christian counselor once told a group of grieving parents, "The night will not last forever." The same God who wrote your story hasn't finished the chapter yet. And isn't that the truth? The tomb looked final until Sunday came. The cross looked like defeat until love rolled away the stone. Every sunrise is proof that darkness never gets the last word. So if tonight you're listening from a place of pain, I want you to hear this: you are not alone. The God who holds galaxies also holds your tears. The same hands that shaped mountains are the hands that lift you when you fall. Dear friends, don't be ashamed of your darkness. It's where God writes his brightest promises. Don't rush the night, it's preparing you to see the dawn. And when morning comes, you'll realize that the light was never gone. It was growing within you all along. Because faith is not about escaping the dark, it's about finding the one who is the light within it. Dear friends, every human heart carries a quiet longing, a sense that this world, with all its beauty and brokenness, is not the end of the story. There's a reason we grieve so deeply, dream so endlessly, and hope so fiercely. It's because eternity has been written into our souls. Heaven is not just a place we go when life ends, it's the home our hearts have been searching for all along. In America, we talk about the American dream. A home, freedom, security, success. But even when we reach those dreams, something still feels unfinished. That emptiness we can't quite fill is not failure. It's a holy reminder that no earthly joy can satisfy a heavenly soul. C.S. Lewis once said that if we find in ourselves a desire nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. And that's the truth every heart knows deep down. We are travelers, not settlers. Life here is the journey. Heaven is the destination. There's a story from Tennessee about a young boy who was blind from birth. His mother often told him about the stars, the mountains, the colors of fall. When he died at the age of 12, his mother said through tears, "For the first time in his life, my son can see." That is the promise of heaven. What we've only imagined here, we will finally behold there. Heaven is not a faraway dream, it's the ultimate reality. The colors will be brighter, the laughter louder, the love deeper than anything we've known. Every injustice will be made right, every tear will be wiped away, every wound will become a story of grace. Dear friends, we live in a world that fears death, but faith transforms death from an ending into a doorway. The body may rest in the earth, but the soul rises home. Heaven is not escape, it's fulfillment. It's the completion of love's journey. In a small town in Texas, a retired pastor told a story at a funeral. He said, "Death is not a period, it's a comma. The sentence continues in eternity." His words silenced the grief in that room. Because when you live with heaven in your heart, even goodbyes begin to sound like see you laters. Heaven calls us not to run from life, but to live it with greater purpose. Knowing eternity awaits doesn't make this life less valuable. It makes every moment more sacred. Every act of kindness echoes forever. Every prayer whispered in faith will one day be answered face to face. There's a nurse from Florida who once shared that her patient, an elderly man, held her hand and said, "I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid of not having loved enough." That's what eternity reminds us. It's not how long we live that matters, but how deeply we love while we're here. In American culture, we often measure life by achievements and milestones. But in heaven's economy, the measure is different. Success is not found in possessions or power. It's found in compassion, forgiveness, and faithfulness. Heaven doesn't reward the wealthy or the famous. It welcomes the humble, the faithful, the loving. Dear friends, when we lose someone we love, heaven feels closer. Grief is love that has nowhere to go except upward. And in that reaching, we touch eternity. Heaven doesn't erase our pain, it redeems it. Every loss here is a seed of glory there. A woman in Oregon once shared how she found peace after losing her husband. She said, "I started looking at the sunset differently. I realized that every beautiful ending carries the promise of a new beginning." Heaven is that promise, the dawn after every dusk. And yet, heaven is not only about the future, it's also about how we live today. When we forgive, we bring heaven to earth. When we love the unlovable, heaven breaks through the ordinary. Every time we choose mercy over anger, grace over pride, eternity touches time. There's a pastor from North Carolina who said, "We talk so much about going to heaven, but Jesus talked more about bringing heaven here." Every time we live with generosity, faith, and hope, we carry a piece of heaven into this world. Dear friends, faith in heaven is not an escape from reality. It's the strength to face it. When we believe this life is not the end, we begin to live with courage. We take risks for love, we forgive more freely, and we give more deeply. Imagine for a moment walking through a meadow at sunrise. The air is cool, the light gentle, and everything feels new. That's just a glimpse of what eternity will be like, familiar yet gloriously transformed. Every pain will make sense. Every unanswered question will find its reason in God's perfect love. There's a father from Oklahoma who lost his daughter to illness. He said, "Heaven didn't take her away from me, it holds her for me." That's the kind of faith that endures, the faith that trusts the story isn't over, even when the chapter ends. Dear friends, don't fear the unknown future. The same God who walked with you through every valley here will welcome you home there. Heaven is not the reward for a perfect life. It's the embrace of a perfect love. And maybe when we arrive, we'll realize that heaven was never just a place above the clouds. It was the presence of God we felt all along, the peace we tasted in worship, the joy we shared in love, the light that never left us, even in our darkest nights. So let your heart rest tonight, not in fear but in hope. Because the promise of heaven isn't just about tomorrow, it's the reason you can live fully today. When the world feels heavy, lift your eyes. This life is not all there is. There is more, so much more. A home without pain, a joy without end, a love that never fades. And one day, when your work here is done and your journey complete, you'll hear the voice of God saying, "Welcome home." Dear friends, purpose is not something you find at the end of your life. It's something you live in every moment of it. Every sunrise brings with it a new assignment from heaven, not just for the preachers, missionaries, or leaders, but for every heart that dares to say, "Here I am, Lord, send me." In America, we're taught from a young age to chase success, to climb higher, run faster, do more. But God's measure of success is not in how far we go, but how faithfully we walk. The world celebrates speed, heaven celebrates direction. And the question that matters most is not, what did I accomplish, but did I walk where God called me to go? There's a teacher from Ohio who once said, I used to think my mission was to change the world. Now I realize it's to love the world, one student at a time. That's what purpose looks like. It's not about scale, it's about obedience. You don't have to reach millions to fulfill God's will. You just have to reach the one in front of you. We often imagine purpose as something grand, a lifelong calling, a single defining moment. But purpose is often woven into the ordinary. The kindness you show a stranger, the patience you offer a child, the courage you show in doing what's right when no one's watching. Each small act becomes a brushstroke in God's masterpiece. A young woman from Colorado who battled depression once said, I thought I had no purpose because I couldn't do anything big. Then one day, a friend told me that my survival itself was inspiring her to keep going. That's when I realized, sometimes staying alive and staying kind is purpose enough. Purpose doesn't always look impressive, but it's always powerful. The smallest light still pierces the darkest night. And when you walk with purpose, even your pain can become part of someone else's healing. Dear friends, walking with purpose doesn't mean you'll always know the destination. Abraham didn't. Moses didn't. Mary didn't. God rarely gives us the map, He gives us Himself. Faith is not seeing the whole path, it's trusting the one who guides it. A pastor in California once said, purpose is not what you achieve, it's what you obey. Sometimes God's call is to go, sometimes it's to stay. Sometimes it's to speak up, and sometimes it's to be silent. The key is listening. Because when your heart is tuned to His voice, even your detours become divine directions. In American culture, we love the idea of independence, of charting our own course. But the kingdom of God runs on dependence, on leaning, listening, and letting go. True purpose begins where control ends. A man from Texas told his congregation, I used to ask God to use me in great ways. Now I ask Him to use me in any way. That's the surrender where purpose begins. It's not about greatness, it's about grace. God doesn't call the qualified, He qualifies the called. Dear friends, purpose is not limited by age, success, or circumstance. Some of the most powerful missions begin when life seems to slow down. There's a retired nurse in Michigan who writes letters to prisoners every week. She says, I may not be able to run like I used to, but I can still reach. That's purpose. Faith with hands that refuse to stop serving. We live in a time when people are desperate to feel significant. Social media shouts, be seen, be known. But God whispers, be faithful. In His eyes, the unseen servant is the most beautiful sight of all. A story from the Midwest tells of a mechanic who fixed cars for single mothers at no cost. When asked why, he simply said, because I remember when someone did that for my mom. His work wasn't glamorous, but it was holy, because every act done in love becomes an altar. Dear friends, when we live with purpose, even our pain is redeemed. The things that once broke us become the very tools God uses to build others. The scars we carry become signposts of His mercy. And when we look back, we realize that even in seasons of confusion, His hand was writing purpose through it all. There's a saying often repeated in American churches, you may be the only Bible someone ever reads. Every word you speak, every action you take, every choice you make tells someone something about God. So what story will your life tell? Purpose is not about perfection. It's about persistence. You will stumble, you will doubt, you will feel unworthy. But purpose walks through all of that with grace, because what God starts in you, He promises to finish. In Boston, a homeless outreach volunteer once shared, I used to think I was helping them, but over time I realized they were helping me see Jesus again. That's the mystery of purpose. It's not one-directional. When you serve others, God serves you through them. Dear friends, the question is not whether your life has purpose, it's whether you will live it on purpose. Every breath you take carries divine intention. You were made for this time, this generation, this moment, and no one else can fulfill the mission God has placed in your hands. When you wake up tomorrow, remember, your work is worship, your kindness is ministry, your patience is testimony. You don't have to wait for a stage to change the world. You just have to walk through your day with eyes open and heart willing. Because every time you show mercy, every time you lift a burden, every time you choose love over indifference, you are walking in your mission. You are walking with God. Dear friends, may we live not just to exist, but to make existence sacred. May our footsteps leave behind traces of grace, and may our lives speak louder than our words. Because walking with purpose is not about reaching the end of the road. It's about transforming every step along the way into a prayer that says, "Thy will be done." And when our journey is over, may we look back and see that every ordinary day was part of an extraordinary plan. Dear friends, forgiveness is one of the hardest things God ever asks us to do. It feels unfair, impossible, even unnatural. Yet it is also one of the most powerful things we can ever experience. Because forgiveness isn't about setting someone else free. It's about setting yourself free. In a world that glorifies revenge and getting even, forgiveness feels like weakness. But in God's kingdom, it is the truest sign of strength. It takes far more courage to lay down anger than to pick up a sword. It takes more faith to let go of bitterness than hold on to pain. There's a story of a man from Georgia whose brother was killed in a robbery. For years, he carried hate like a weight on his chest. One day he said, "I realized that by refusing to forgive, I was letting the man who killed my brother kill me too, every single day." That day he prayed, "God, I can't forgive him, but you can. Do it through me." And in that moment, the prison doors around his heart finally opened. Dear friends, forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the wound never happened. It means refusing to let the wound define you. It's not forgetting the past, it's trusting God with the justice that only He can bring. Forgiveness is not saying it's okay, it's saying I will not let this destroy me. In American culture, we love stories of victory. Heroes overcoming enemies, justice served, wrongs made right. But Jesus told a different kind of story. The victory of a heart that chooses mercy over revenge. When He hung on the cross, betrayed, beaten, mocked, and dying, He looked at the people who hurt Him and said, "Father, forgive them." That is not weakness, that is divine power. A woman in North Carolina once shared that she was abused as a child. For decades, she lived with anger and pain. Then one night, she said she heard God whisper, "You don't have to carry this anymore." She began to pray for the one who had hurt her, not because he deserved it, but because she deserved peace. And for the first time, she said, "I slept through the night without fear." Forgiveness is not about the other person's repentance, it's about your release. You can't control whether they change, apologize, or even understand, but you can choose to walk out of the cell of resentment and into the light of freedom. Dear friends, holding on to unforgiveness is like drinking poison and hoping the other person gets sick. The only one it harms is you. When you forgive, you don't change the past, you change your future. There's a story told after the Charleston church shooting in South Carolina. When families of the victims faced the shooter in court, they said words that stunned the nation, "We forgive you." Their pain was unimaginable. Yet their grace was undeniable. Forgiveness didn't erase their loss, but it proved that evil could not have the last word. Forgiveness is a rebellion against the cycle of hate. It's choosing peace when everything in you screams for revenge. It's saying, "I will not let darkness write my story." Dear friends, maybe the person you need to forgive isn't a stranger. Maybe it's a parent who wounded you with words, a friend who walked away, a spouse who broke your trust, or maybe, the hardest one of all, it's yourself. There's a man from California who shared, "I used to ask God to forgive me for what I did, but the hardest thing was learning to forgive myself for who I became. Sometimes, the person we hold hostage is the one in the mirror. But if God, who knows every detail of your life, still calls you his child, then it's time you stop calling yourself unworthy. Forgiveness is not a feeling, it's a decision. Feelings follow obedience. And when you choose to forgive, even trembling, even crying, God begins the healing you thought was impossible. A veteran from Illinois once told his pastor, "I fought wars overseas, but the hardest battle I ever fought was in my heart, against bitterness." He said he finally realized that the people who hurt him didn't deserve his peace, but God did. That day, he laid his pain at the altar and walked away lighter. Forgiveness doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey, a process of releasing, remembering, and releasing again. Some days, you'll have to forgive the same person more than once. That's not failure, that's faith. Every time you forgive, the chains grow weaker. Dear friends, think about this. When Jesus forgave us, he didn't wait for us to deserve it. He forgave while we were still broken. And now he calls us to do the same, not because others deserve mercy, but because we were shown mercy first. There's a pastor from Oklahoma who once said, "When you forgive, you don't lose power, you take it back." That's what forgiveness does. It restores authority to your soul. It says, "You no longer control me. My peace belongs to God now." In American families, forgiveness can heal generations. A father who apologizes to his son, a mother who releases her anger, a friend who picks up the phone after years of silence. These are small resurrections, moments where love breathes life back into what once seemed dead. Forgiveness is not about erasing memory, it's about transforming it. You may remember the pain, but now it points to grace. The wound becomes a witness. The scar becomes a story of how God turns suffering into strength. Dear friends, if you're waiting for the perfect moment to forgive, it will never come. Forgiveness doesn't start when the pain ends, it's what makes healing begin. Maybe right now, someone's name comes to mind, a face, a memory, a word you can't forget. Take a breath. Whisper their name to God. You don't have to say it to them yet. Just start by saying it to him. Because forgiveness begins in heaven long before it's spoken on earth. And when you finally let go, you'll discover something beautiful. Peace rushes in where anger once lived. You'll laugh again, you'll breathe again, you'll walk in freedom again. Dear friends, forgiveness is not losing, it's winning the battle for your soul. It's not weakness, it's power surrendered to love. And when you forgive, you're never more like God than in that moment. So today, choose freedom, choose grace, choose to live lighter. Because life is too short to carry chains that Jesus already broke. And when you walk away from bitterness and into love, you'll find that forgiveness isn't the end of your story, it's the beginning of your healing. Dear friends, there are moments in life when words fail us, when the heart aches so deeply that even prayer feels impossible. We fold our hands, we close our eyes, and the only thing that comes out is a sigh. Yet that sigh, that whisper of the soul, is often where real prayer begins. Because prayer isn't about perfect words, it's about presence. It's the quiet conversation between a fragile heart and an unfailing God. In a world filled with noise, prayer is rebellion. Every time we choose silence over distraction, stillness over chaos, we are declaring that God's voice matters more than the world's volume. There's a story of a soldier from Kentucky who returned home after war. Nightmares followed him. He couldn't sleep. One night, he drove to a small church, sat in the dark, and said, "God, I don't even know what to say." And in that silence, he said he felt something shift. Not outside, but inside. Peace didn't shout, it whispered. He realized that God had been waiting in the quiet all along. Prayer doesn't change God, it changes us. It softens hearts hardened by pain, it steadies minds spinning with fear, it replaces chaos with clarity. Prayer pulls heaven into earth, not by magic but by surrender. Dear friends, prayer is not a transaction, it's a relationship. It's not about convincing God to do what we want, but about aligning our hearts with what He already knows is best. In American life, we often treat prayer like a checklist: before meals, before bed, before trouble. But true prayer isn't about time or place. It's about connection. You can pray while driving through traffic in Los Angeles, while walking a quiet trail in Montana, or while holding your child in the middle of the night. God listens, not to where you are, but to who you are when you come to Him. There's a woman in Florida who prayed for her son to return home after years of addiction. For a long time, nothing changed, but every morning she sat on her porch, coffee in hand, whispering the same words: "Lord, bring him back." Years later, he did return, not just home, but to faith. She said, "Maybe my prayers didn't change him at first, but they changed me. They kept my hope alive when everything else fell apart." Prayer is not wasted breath. It is a seed planted in unseen soil. Some grow quickly, others take years, but every prayer, every single one, is heard. Dear friends, sometimes God answers with a yes, sometimes with a no, and sometimes with silence. And that silence doesn't mean absence. It means He's working in ways we can't yet understand. The most powerful prayers are not the ones that move mountains, but the ones that move our hearts to trust, even when the mountain doesn't move. A pastor in Oklahoma once said, "We often pray for God to change our circumstances, but sometimes He wants to use our circumstances to change us." That's the hidden beauty of prayer. It shapes us into people who can carry His presence into the world. In the rush of modern life, prayer may feel like a luxury, but it's oxygen for the soul. America runs on schedules, goals, and deadlines, yet the Spirit runs on stillness. Without prayer, even success feels hollow. Without prayer, even blessings feel heavy. But with prayer, even burdens become bearable. A single mother from Chicago once shared, "Every night after I tuck my kids in, I sit on the floor and pray, 'God, I'm tired, but thank you for getting me through another day.'" She said that simple prayer gave her strength she couldn't explain. That's what prayer does. It fills empty places with unseen grace. Dear friends, prayer isn't about escaping reality. It's about inviting God into it. When you pray in the hospital room, in the courtroom, in the kitchen sink moments of life, you're building altars in the middle of the ordinary. You're turning the noise of the world into a sanctuary for your soul. In American churches, we often gather in circles, holding hands, heads bowed. It's a beautiful image, imperfect people connecting to a perfect God. But prayer doesn't have to be formal. It can be laughter. It can be tears. It can be silence. The language of heaven isn't English or Latin, it's honesty. A firefighter in New York said after a tragic rescue, "When I couldn't find words, I just said, 'God, help me.' And He did." Sometimes that's all you need. Not a speech, not a sermon, just 3 words said from the heart. Dear friends, prayer is not about timing, it's about trusting. God hears you even before you speak. He knows the prayers you can't put into words, the ones buried under years of fear or regret. Every sigh, every tear, every heartbeat of longing, He collects them all. There's a story from the Midwest about a farmer who lost his crops to drought. He stood in his empty field and said, "Lord, I don't understand, but I still thank you for the soil." That's faith at its purest, not praising God for what we see, but for who He is. Prayer invites transformation. When you start praying for your enemies, your heart begins to soften. When you pray for strength, you often receive peace. When you pray for answers, you find trust. And slowly, the person you become through prayer is the real miracle. Dear friends, prayer doesn't always change the world overnight, but it always changes the person who prays. And through that person, God changes the world. Think of the quiet prayers whispered in hospital hallways, in classrooms, on battlefields, and city buses. These unseen moments move the heart of heaven. Prayer doesn't need applause, it only needs authenticity. If you're listening right now and feel like your prayers have gone unanswered, I want you to know this. God has heard every one of them. The silence doesn't mean He's forgotten you. It means He's still preparing something sacred. Sometimes the greatest act of faith is to keep praying when you feel nothing, to stay in the conversation even when heaven feels quiet, because the same God who parted seas still parts hearts open to hope. Dear friends, maybe the miracle isn't that God changes everything you pray for. Maybe the miracle is that you're still praying, you're still believing, you're still showing up to the conversation. That alone is victory. So tonight, when you close your eyes, don't worry about saying the perfect prayer. Just be still. Let your heart speak. Let your silence be a psalm. Because the God who listens in thunder also listens in whispers. And when you wake tomorrow, you may find that nothing around you has changed, but everything within you has. That's the power of prayer. Not in the noise, not in the miracles, but in the quiet moments where heaven and earth meet in the stillness of your heart. Dear friends, we often imagine God in grand places, in cathedrals with stained glass, in the thunder of revival meetings, or in the miracles that make headlines. But the truth is, God loves to hide in the ordinary. He is in the quiet mornings before the world awakens, in the laughter around a dinner table, in the kindness of a stranger holding open a door. Grace, my friends, is not rare. It is everywhere. We just forget to look. In America, we live in a culture that celebrates the extraordinary. We chase the next big thing, the next promotion, the next experience, the next adventure. Yet, while we wait for something spectacular, we often miss the sacred moments unfolding right in front of us. The greatest miracles are not always the ones that make the news. They're the ones that change our hearts. There's a teacher in Arizona who once said she used to pray for God to give her a sign of His power. One morning, while she was grading papers, a student with autism walked up, smiled, and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me." She said that was the moment she realized, grace doesn't always come as thunder. Sometimes it comes as a whisper that says, "I'm here." Grace in the ordinary means seeing God in the small things, like the sunrise after a sleepless night, or a child's laugh that breaks the heaviness of a weary day. It's the coffee shared with a friend who listens more than they speak, the hug that lasts longer than pain, the moment when forgiveness finally feels possible. Dear friends, when we begin to see God in the simple, we begin to live with new eyes. Suddenly, the daily commute becomes a prayer. The grocery line becomes an opportunity to show kindness. The family dinner becomes an altar of gratitude. There's a story from Iowa of a man who lost his wife after 40 years of marriage. Every morning, he still pours 2 cups of coffee, one for himself, one for her, and sits quietly at the table. When asked why, he said, "Because she taught me that love doesn't end when life does. And when I sit here, I feel close to her and to God." That, my friends, is grace, the kind that turns grief into gratitude. In the heart of grace is presence, the awareness that every moment, no matter how mundane, is soaked in divine love. You don't have to be perfect to experience it. You just have to be present. Grace is not found in doing more. It's found in noticing more. A pastor from Nashville once said, "We keep asking God to move, but He's already moving. We just have to slow down enough to see it." In our rush to get somewhere, we forget that God often walks at 3 miles an hour, the speed of love, the pace of a human step. Dear friends, grace is in the interruptions. When your plans fall apart, when traffic delays you, when life doesn't go the way you wanted, it's often grace redirecting your path. God doesn't waste moments, He weaves them. There's a single mom from Detroit who shared that one evening, while washing dishes, she felt overwhelmed. Bills, loneliness, exhaustion. Her little daughter came up behind her, hugged her leg and said, "Mommy, you're my favorite superhero." She said she broke down crying, not from the pressure, but from realizing that even in her chaos, God was loving her through her child's eyes. Grace doesn't erase the struggle, it transforms it. It doesn't promise easy days, it promises meaningful ones. And when we see life through the lens of grace, even the hardest days begin to shimmer with holy purpose. Dear friends, sometimes we look for God in the mountaintop experiences, but He often meets us in the kitchen, in the classroom, in the cubicle. He's in the rhythm of breathing, the warmth of sunlight, the quiet of night. Every heartbeat is a gift. Every breath is grace. A nurse from Oregon once told a story about an elderly patient who thanked her for every little thing. A sip of water, a blanket, a smile. When she asked him why, he said, "I learned that when you can't walk far or do much, gratitude becomes your worship." That's what grace does. It turns the smallest act into sacred ground. We don't have to go to a faraway mission field to live a life of meaning. The mission field might be your office, your family, your neighborhood. God doesn't call everyone to preach from pulpits. He calls most of us to preach with our lives, to show love, patience, and hope right where we are. Dear friends, America is a place of dreams and drive, but grace reminds us that we don't have to earn God's love. You don't have to be the best, the strongest, or the most faithful. You just have to be open. Grace finds you not at your best, but at your most real. There's a barista in Seattle who keeps a little note taped to her coffee machine. It says, "This cup might change someone's day." She says it reminds her that every latte she makes, every smile she gives, can be holy if done in love. That's the heart of grace. It makes the ordinary sacred. Dear friends, grace doesn't need a stage. It shines brightest in quiet corners, in the janitor sweeping the school floor with joy, in the volunteer serving food at a shelter, in the neighbor who checks in just to say, "How are you really?" The kingdom of God is built not by grand gestures, but by humble hearts. When we begin to live with awareness of grace, life itself becomes a prayer. You start to see blessings where you once saw burdens. The same job you complained about becomes the way God provides. The same family that frustrates you becomes the place where patience grows. Grace isn't something you chase, it's something you recognize. It's already around you, waiting to be named, waiting to be thanked for. Dear friends, maybe today you're listening while doing something ordinary, driving, cooking, cleaning, walking your dog. Know this, even this moment matters. Even this moment is holy. God is here in the middle of your daily life, whispering, "You are loved, you are seen, you are enough." When we learn to see grace in the ordinary becomes extraordinary. Every sunrise becomes a sermon. Every act of love becomes worship. Every day becomes a doorway to divine wonder. Because grace isn't somewhere else, it's right where you are. Dear friends, there are seasons when life feels like it's falling apart, when the ground beneath your feet gives way and everything you trusted in starts to crumble. Maybe it's the loss of someone you love. Maybe it's the dream that slipped through your fingers. Maybe it's the silence of God when you needed Him most. We've all been there, in the dark, wondering, "Where are you, Lord?" Pain has a way of breaking us open. But what if that breaking isn't the end? What if it's the beginning? What if the moments that crush us are the same moments that God uses to reshape us? You see, God doesn't waste pain. He transforms it. He turns wounds into wisdom, heartbreak into healing, struggle into strength. In American culture, we're taught to hide our brokenness. We post smiles, filter our photos, and pretend we're fine. But the truth is, God doesn't work through perfection. He works through cracks, because only broken things can let the light in. There's a story of a woman from Colorado whose husband left her after 20 years of marriage. For months, she couldn't get out of bed. One morning, she said she heard a voice in her heart whisper, "You're still mine." That day, she decided to get up, one small step at a time. She said later, "I thought I was losing everything, but I was actually finding God." Dear friends, strength isn't born in comfort, it's forged in the fire. Every person who has ever inspired the world has walked through pain. The farmer who rebuilds after the storm, the veteran who learns to live again after war, the mother who keeps believing when her child is sick. These are the quiet heroes of faith, the ones who fall but rise anyway. A pastor from Texas once said, "The storm doesn't destroy your faith, it reveals what your faith is built on." If your faith depends on good days, it will collapse in bad ones. But if your faith is anchored in God's love, no storm can sweep it away. In life, pain is the classroom where trust is taught. We want answers, but God offers assurance. We want escape, but He offers endurance. We want the pain to end, but He wants the purpose to begin. There's a firefighter in New York who lost his partner in a rescue mission. For years, he blamed God. One night, while visiting the memorial wall, he said he finally broke down and cried, "Why him and not me?" He said in that moment, he felt something deep inside whisper, "Because you're still needed." Since then, he spent his life mentoring young firefighters and helping them find faith after trauma. Out of his deepest grief came his greatest calling. Dear friends, when life breaks you, it's not a sign that God has abandoned you. It's a sign that He's rebuilding you. Sometimes He allows what feels like loss to make room for something greater. A woman in Georgia once compared her life to stained glass. She said, "God took the shattered pieces and made something more beautiful than I could have ever imagined." That's how grace works. It doesn't erase the cracks, it shines through them. In American society, we're taught to measure strength by how well we stand tall. But in God's eyes, true strength is how humbly we kneel. The strongest people are not those who never cry. They are the ones who cry and still choose to believe. Dear friends, sometimes pain strips away what we thought we needed so we can discover what truly matters. It peels back our pride, our plans, our self-reliance, until all that's left is faith. And in that raw, honest place, God meets us, not with condemnation, but compassion. There's a young man from California who lost his business during a recession. He said, "I thought God had forgotten me, but in that season, I learned to pray not for success, but for peace." Years later, when he rebuilt, he said he realized that what God restored was not his wealth, but his character. Pain has a strange way of teaching perspective. It reminds us that we are not in control, and that's okay, because the same hands that hold the universe are holding you. Dear friends, maybe you're listening right now from a hospital bed, or a quiet room where tears have become your language. I want you to know this. God is closer than your pain. He's not watching from a distance. He's right beside you, weeping with you, carrying you. In Tennessee, after a deadly tornado, a local pastor stood amid the rubble of his church and said, "We lost our building, but not our faith." The next Sunday, they gathered outside singing hymns with cracked voices and tearful eyes. He said, "This is what resurrection looks like. Sometimes faith doesn't roar, it whispers, 'I'm still here.'" Pain doesn't have to be pretty to be purposeful. Sometimes the breakthrough is not in the healing, but in the holding, when you realize God has never let go. Dear friends, God's strength often comes disguised as weakness. When you can't go on, He carries you. When you can't pray, the Spirit prays for you. When you can't see hope, He is still writing it into your story. There's a veteran in Virginia who lost both legs in battle. When asked how he keeps faith, he said, "I used to ask God why He didn't stop the explosion. Now I thank Him for the strength to keep standing, even without legs." That's what redemption looks like. Not the absence of pain, but the transformation of it. Sometimes what breaks you is also what brings you to your knees, and that's exactly where healing begins. Dear friends, don't rush your pain. Don't despise your tears. Every tear is a prayer God collects. Every scar, a story He intends to redeem. You may not see it now, but one day you'll look back and realize that the valley you dreaded became the place you met Him most deeply. In American culture, we admire the comeback story, but the greatest comeback in history began with a cross. Before resurrection came crucifixion. Before the empty tomb came the darkest night. So if you're in your Good Friday season right now, hold on, Sunday is coming. Because when life breaks you, it's not the end of your story. It's the moment God begins rewriting it with grace. Dear friends, strength doesn't mean never falling apart. It means learning that when you do, you're falling into the arms of the one who never will. And when the world sees your scars, may they not see your pain, but the proof that God heals, restores, and builds beauty from brokenness. Because every time you rise again, you echo the greatest truth there is: nothing, no pain, no loss, no darkness can separate you from the love of God. Dear friends, if there is one truth that stands when everything else falls, it is this: God's love never fails. Not when life hurts, not when you wander, not when you doubt. His love is not fragile. It's fierce, unbreakable, and everlasting. It is the heartbeat of creation, the rhythm beneath every breath we take, and the anchor that holds when every storm breaks loose. In a world where love often feels conditional, earned by success, withdrawn by disappointment, God's love stands apart. It doesn't depend on who you are, what you've done, or how far you've run. It is love that goes searching for the lost, sits with the broken, and welcomes the undeserving. There's a story from Oklahoma about a father whose teenage son ran away after a fight. For months he searched, posting flyers, calling police, driving every street he could. Finally, one night, he received a call. "We found your son." The father raced to the station, wrapped his arms around his boy, and whispered, "You could never run far enough to lose my love." That's what God's love is like. It doesn't stop at the edge of our rebellion. It runs straight into it. Dear friends, we often think love is a feeling, but divine love is a choice, a commitment stronger than emotion. Human love can fade, but God's love endures. We see it in every sunrise that greets the sinner and the saint alike, in every breath given freely, even when we forget to say thank you. In American culture, love is often portrayed as perfect romance, grand gestures, or instant happiness. But God's love is different. It's patient, steady, and present in both the beauty and the breaking. It doesn't walk away when life gets messy. It rolls up its sleeves and enters the mess with us. A pastor from Texas once said, "If you want to know how much God loves you, look at the cross. That's where love stopped pretending and started bleeding." The cross isn't just a symbol of suffering. It's the proof that love will go to any length to bring you home. There's a nurse in Chicago who told of holding the hand of a dying patient who had no family. The woman whispered, "Will anyone remember me?" The nurse squeezed her hand and said, "God already does." That's the power of divine love. It sees the forgotten, it remembers the unseen, and it calls each one of us by name. Dear friends, God's love doesn't promise an easy life, but it promises a faithful presence. It doesn't prevent the storm, but it sits with you in the boat until the storm passes. It doesn't erase your scars, but it transforms them into stories of redemption. A firefighter in California once said, "When the flames surrounded me, I prayed not to be fearless, but to feel God with me." He survived that blaze, and when asked how, he said, "Because love pulled me out when fear froze me." That's what unfailing love does. It casts out fear and fills the empty spaces with courage. We live in a time when love has been cheapened, used for convenience, traded for comfort, forgotten when inconvenient. But the love of God doesn't expire when feelings fade. It's the same yesterday, today, and forever. It doesn't say, "I'll love you if," it says, "I love you, period." Dear friends, maybe you've been hurt by love that broke its promise. Maybe you've trusted someone who let you down. But hear this: God's love is not like theirs. It doesn't disappoint, betray, or abandon. His love stays, always. A woman from Pennsylvania once shared that after years of addiction, she walked into a church expecting judgment. Instead, a stranger hugged her and said, "Welcome home." She said, "That moment changed me, not because someone loved me perfectly, but because I realized God had never stopped." That's what love does. It reaches into the pit, finds the lost, and reminds them, they still belong. Dear friends, love that never fails is not about what we do, it's about who God is. Love is not just one of his attributes, it is his very nature. Everything he does, every command, every correction, every blessing, flows from love. There's a Marine from North Carolina who said after losing comrades in war, "For a long time, I couldn't believe in love. I saw too much death. But one night, while sitting alone, I remembered the words of my chaplain. God doesn't stop loving because the world stops listening." That night, I prayed again for the first time in years. Even battle-hardened hearts can soften under the touch of divine love. Dear friends, when you truly understand that you are loved, not for what you've done, but for who you are, you start to live differently. You become freer, gentler, more compassionate. You begin to love others, not because they deserve it, but because you've been loved undeservedly yourself. A farmer in Kansas once said, "I used to think loving people was about fixing them. Now I think it's about seeing them the way God does." That's the secret of unfailing love. It doesn't see who people are now, it sees who they could be in grace. Love that never fails forgives the unforgivable, believes in the impossible, and stands firm when everything else falls apart. It's not loud or boastful, it's steady, faithful, unshakable. Dear friends, the world will try to tell you that love is weak. But divine love is the greatest power there is. It moves mountains, heals wounds, and raises the dead. It's the force that carried Jesus through the cross, and it's the same love that carries you through every trial. If you've ever felt unworthy of love, remember this. Nothing you've done can make God love you less, and nothing you can do will make him love you more. His love isn't earned, it's given. All you have to do is receive it. A pastor in Atlanta once said, "God's love doesn't just forgive your past, it fights for your future." That's what love does. It never gives up. Dear friends, love that never fails doesn't mean a life without pain. It means a life that can't be defeated by it. It means even when you fall into mercy. Even when you fail into grace. And even when you die, you rise into eternal love. When everything else fades, money, fame, strength, even time itself, love remains. Because love is the language of eternity. And when you finally stand before God, it won't be your achievements that matter. It will be how much you loved and how deeply you allowed his love to flow through you. So wherever you are tonight, whether you're joyful or weary, confident or broken, remember this. You are loved with a love that cannot be shaken, cannot be taken, and will never let you go. Because love never fails. Dear friends, hope is the thread that ties every part of our faith together. It is the light that refuses to go out, even in the darkest night. Hope is what whispers to the weary soul, "This is not the end." And when it is anchored in the love of God, that hope becomes unbreakable. In America, we live in a culture that often defines hope by circumstances. Hope in a job, in politics, in medicine, in success. But biblical hope is different. It is not based on what changes. It is based on who never changes. It is not a wish, it's a certainty rooted in God's promises. There's a man from Pennsylvania who once said that after losing everything in a flood, he stood in the ruins of his home and found a single wooden cross still standing in the mud. He said, "That cross was my reminder that even when everything washes away, God's hope stands firm." That's the kind of hope we are called to live with. Not shallow optimism, but deep assurance. Dear friends, eternal hope is not just about heaven someday. It's about heaven breaking into your life today. It's about walking through pain without being consumed by it, about facing uncertainty without fear, about knowing that love and goodness still win, no matter what the headlines say. In a small town in Kansas, a farmer told his church after losing his crops to drought, "I don't know what next season will bring, but I know who holds the seasons." That is faith speaking through hope. A heart that refuses to be crushed because it remembers who is in control. Hope is not the absence of struggle, it's the presence of God in the struggle. It's the quiet confidence that the same hands that painted the stars are still holding you. Dear friends, we are all travelers in this world. We chase dreams, we endure losses, we celebrate joys, we grieve goodbyes. But one day, when our journey is complete, we will step into the light of eternity. Not as strangers, but as children returning home. A pastor from Virginia once said, "When my time comes, I don't want people to say he died. I want them to say he went home." That's what eternal hope does. It removes the fear of death and replaces it with anticipation for homecoming. In the face of pain, hope says, God is still good. In the face of loss, hope says, love never ends. In the face of death, hope says, this is not the end, it's the beginning of forever. Dear friends, in a world filled with division and despair, hope becomes an act of resistance. Every time you choose kindness over cruelty, forgiveness over vengeance, faith over fear, you are living as a bearer of eternal hope. There's a nurse from Texas who shared that during the pandemic, she stood beside countless patients who couldn't see their families. She would hold their hands and whisper prayers. She said, "I realized hope isn't something we talk about. It's something we become." That's the kind of hope that changes the world, one act of love at a time. Hope is contagious. It spreads through compassion, through resilience, through people who refuse to stop believing. America has seen wars, disasters, heartbreak. But through it all, there have always been those who stood in the rubble, lit a candle, and said, "We will rise again." Because hope doesn't die, it multiplies. Dear friends, when you live in the light of God's love, you become a reflection of His hope. You start to see the world not as broken beyond repair, but as a canvas waiting for redemption. You begin to understand that every act of love, every prayer, every sacrifice echoes into eternity. A mother in California once said that after losing her daughter to illness, she planted a garden in her memory. She said, "Every spring when the flowers bloom, I remember that love never ends. It just takes on new life." That's the beauty of eternal hope. It turns mourning into meaning. Dear friends, God's hope is not fragile. It doesn't depend on the weather or the economy or the news. It stands strong through every season because it flows from His unchanging heart. So if you are weary today, hold on. If your prayers feel unanswered, don't give up. Hope is not lost. It is waiting right beyond the horizon. The same God who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. And one day, when you see Him face to face, you will understand everything that once confused you. Every tear will make sense. Every loss will reveal its purpose. Every pain will turn into praise. Until that day, live with the light of heaven in your heart. Be a beacon of hope in a world that needs it more than ever. Let your life whisper to others, there is more. There is love. There is eternity. Because, dear friends, this is not the end of your story. It's just the prelude to glory. Dear friends, as we come to the end of this journey together, may you carry with you the unshakable truth that God's love never fails, His mercy never runs out, and His grace never stops reaching for you. If you are walking through joy, may His presence deepen it. If you are walking through sorrow, may His comfort surround you. And if you are walking through uncertainty, may His peace guard your heart. Let us pray together. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the gift of your endless love. Through the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the gentle mother who never stops guiding her children, and through Saint Joseph, protector and faithful servant, we ask you to bless every heart listening right now. May your light pierce their darkness. May your strength lift their burdens. May your peace rest upon their homes, and may your love overflow in their lives. Lord, fill us with your Spirit so that we may become instruments of your hope in the world, people who forgive freely, love deeply, and serve humbly. Help us to see you in the faces of those we meet and to live each day as a reflection of your mercy. We ask this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior and Redeemer. Amen. Dear friends, as you leave this moment and return to your daily life, remember, You are not alone. God walks with you. His love surrounds you. His grace sustains you. And now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May His face shine upon you and give you peace. May His favor follow you all the days of your life until the day you see Him face to face in eternal joy. And before we part, I invite you, if this message touched your heart, please subscribe, leave a comment, and share this message so that together we can spread the love of God to every corner of the world. Because the world is waiting for light, for love, for the hope that only Christ can bring. Go forth, dear friends, and let your life be that light. May the love of God, the grace of Christ, and the peace of the Holy Spirit be with you always. Amen.